This Waggaman neighborhood is still in shock after a Thanksgiving Day tragedy that claimed the life of a St. John the Baptist Parish Sheriff's deputy. Shaquille Guerin was killed by his brother Thursday evening.
This is just hard to believe.
Picture a quiet residential street in Waggaman, Louisiana. Marigold Lane. A street lined with modest homes, each with neatly trimmed lawns, festive decorations, and the smell of home-cooked food drifting into the crisp, late November air. Cars lined both sides of the street, headlights flickering as relatives arrived for Thanksgiving gatherings. Children ran between houses, their laughter bouncing off the pavement. Inside the homes, plates clinked, gravy boats were passed, and conversations flowed freely, neighbors catching up, family members teasing one another. Stories of the past year, retold with a mix of nostalgia and humor. When the clock strikes midnight, the truth comes out. I'm 12 a.m. crime, and every single day I bring you real cases of domestic violence that turned deadly. The stories the system tried to bury, the victims who deserved justice. If you're about that raw, unfiltered truth, hit subscribe. New case drops every day at midnight. Don't sleep on justice. This is 12 a.m. crime. Among the familiar faces was a man well known to the community, Shaquille Guerin. 35 years old, with a calm demeanor that belied the toughness his job demanded. A deputy with the St. John the Baptist Parish Sheriff's Office, he had spent 8 years patrolling streets, responding to emergencies, and protecting the people around him. That night, he was simply a guest at his family's Thanksgiving gathering, surrounded by familiar faces, the smells of roasted turkey and sweet potato pies enveloping him. But then, a gunshot, and another. The sounds shattered the warmth of the evening, sending a ripple of confusion through the gathered families. People froze mid-step, plates half raised, conversations cut off mid-sentence. When someone finally stepped outside to investigate, they saw a horrifying sight. Shaquille lying motionless in the street, blood pooling around him, the very life that had been dedicated to protecting others, now slipping away under the Louisiana sky. And the man who fired the shots, still at the gathering, his brother, Darius Guerin. In a matter of moments, a family holiday had become a crime scene. A community that had known the Guerins for decades was left grappling with an unfathomable reality. The man who had spent his life shielding others could not shield himself from the danger within his own family. Shaquille Guerin was more than just a uniform. He was a fixture in his community, a man whose life was defined by service, commitment, and an almost unshakable optimism. At 35, he had already spent 8 years as a deputy with the St. John Parish Sheriff's Office, patrolling neighborhoods, investigating incidents, and mentoring younger officers. He was the kind of guy who always looked for the good in people, said Sheriff Mike Trigg.
Came to work every day, tough job, but he did it. And, he was the eternal optimist. He always thought no matter what, the Saints would win the Super Bowl, even though we're not going to this year. But he remained positive in his professional life and his personal life. I'm going to miss him. Trying to make all of this add up right now. To be killed in line of duty is one thing, but to be killed by a family member, I just can't make that. I can't accept that right now.
In 2019, he received a life-saving award, a recognition for acts of bravery that could have made headlines. But he didn't seek attention. He showed up every day because he believed it was his duty. He directed traffic for school children, responded to calls no one else wanted, and made sure that people in his community knew there was someone looking out for them. Parents would call the sheriff's office weeks later to ask, "Is that the officer who used to help us at the school?" That was Shaquille, a man whose presence was quietly impactful, whose work spoke louder than words. His dedication wasn't limited to the badge. Shaquille was a husband and father of 3 children. His family carried a legacy of law enforcement. His father had worked with the St. James Sheriff's Office. For Shaquille, service wasn't just a career, it was in his blood. He understood the risks of putting on that uniform every day, yet he did it willingly, knowing that danger was a constant companion. For 8 years, he faced it anyway. The Waggaman neighborhood was more than just where Shaquille lived. It was home. The Guerins had lived on Marigold Lane for over 20 years. Neighbors knew them, celebrated milestones with them, and had watched the children grow up alongside Shaquille. The idea that violence could erupt on that street, in a home they had considered safe was almost inconceivable. Then there was Darius Guerin, 32 years old, Shaquille's younger brother. Unlike Shaquille, little is publicly known about Darius, his career, his day-to-day life, his friendships. There's no public record of criminal behavior, no history of domestic disputes, no documented warning signs leading up to that Thanksgiving evening. Family violence can be insidious. It doesn't always announce itself with a police report or restraining order. Sometimes it festers quietly, buried under years of resentment, frustration, or unspoken conflict. And sometimes, as in this case, it erupts suddenly, leaving devastation in its wake. Thanksgiving is traditionally a day of gratitude, a day when families gather to celebrate unity, if only for a few hours. For the Guerins, Thanksgiving 2024 became a day that tore their family apart. What simmered between Shaquille and Darius reached a tipping point, and when it erupted, it left a permanent scar on everyone involved. November 27th, 2024, started like any Thanksgiving in Waggaman. The neighborhood was alive with the familiar chaos of holiday preparations, cars pulling into driveways, children darting across lawns, laughter, and the smell of roasted turkey filling homes. Inside the Guerin residence, the family gathered, and Shaquille arrived to spend the evening with his loved ones. Darius was there too. What exactly triggered the confrontation remains unknown. Reports do not provide details about arguments or interactions that led to the shooting. Neighbors, who later spoke to reporters, claimed they did not hear the gunshots, suggesting the altercation started inside the home, away from prying eyes. Whatever sparked the violence, it unfolded behind closed doors, where only those inside could witness it. At some point, Darius Guerin pulled out a gun and used it on his brother. By 5:30 p.m., the call came in, shots fired on the 30 block of Marigold Lane. Jefferson Parish deputies were first on the scene. Despite Shaquille working for St. John Parish, the shooting occurred in Jefferson Parish, placing the response in their jurisdiction. The deputies arrived to a chaotic scene, cars scattered across the street, neighbors and family members outside in shock. And in the middle of it all, Shaquille Guerin, lying motionless in the pavement. He had sustained at least one gunshot wound. Paramedics tried desperately to save him, but it was too late. Shaquille was dead. The realization that this was no ordinary shooting, no stranger-on-stranger crime, rippled through the deputies on scene. This was one of their own. And the shooter? His brother Darius had already fled. The street was cordoned off with yellow crime scene tape, fluttering in the cool November breeze like a warning banner to a world that had just turned upside down. Marigold Lane, usually calm and familiar, had become a theater of confusion, grief, and fear. Neighbors gathered at the edges of the cordon, whispering in disbelief, clutching coats around themselves as they tried to process what had just happened. The Guerin family home, which moments ago had been filled with laughter and warmth, now sat quiet, shuttered in tragedy. Jefferson Parish deputies moved quickly, their first priority, securing the scene and ensuring no further danger. They documented the position of Shaquille Guerin's body, noting every detail from the pool of blood in the street to the scattered shoes and chairs that hinted at the struggle that had occurred inside the home. Inside, forensic teams searched for shell casings, fingerprints, and any other clues that could explain the sequence of events. Every officer who arrived knew the stakes were higher than usual. This wasn't a robbery gone wrong or a random street shooting. The victim was a fellow deputy, a man who had spent years protecting others, who had stood beside them in the line of duty. And the shooter was his brother, still armed, still at large. The very fact that Darius Guerin had been willing to kill someone he shared blood with made him unpredictable, dangerous, and high priority. Investigators began canvassing the neighborhood. Families were asked what they saw or heard. Neighbors were questioned, and all vehicles leaving the street were documented. At the same time, deputies obtained descriptions of the vehicle Darius had used to flee. Every passing minute increased the urgency. The longer he remained free, the higher the risk of further violence. It didn't take long for law enforcement to identify Darius Guerin's vehicle, a car now driving away from the scene, carrying with it the man who had just changed a family forever. The Jefferson Parish Sheriff's Office issued alerts, notifying all neighboring jurisdictions. Street cameras were checked, and officers began systematic searches of the surrounding areas. The community, meanwhile, remained paralyzed with shock. Neighbors who had lived alongside the Guerins for decades could not reconcile the man they knew, quiet, reserved, a part of the fabric of the neighborhood, with the violent actions unfolding. As night fell, deputies widened the search. Every road leading out of Waggaman was checked. Every gas station, convenience store, and neighborhood exit became a potential checkpoint. They were hunting a man who had demonstrated he could disregard family, law, and safety in one fateful moment. Around 7 p.m., just about an hour and a half after the shooting, a Jefferson Parish deputy spotted Darius Guerin's vehicle near the intersection of Ames Boulevard and Lapalco Boulevard. The deputy activated lights and sirens, signaling for him to pull over. But Darius did not comply. Instead, he accelerated, and in that instant, the investigation escalated from a murder investigation into a high-stakes chase. Cars weaved through suburban streets as deputies pursued him, their sirens cutting through the Thanksgiving night like a warning to everyone on the road. Danger was near. Families driving home or returning from holiday gatherings were caught in the periphery of a drama they could never have imagined. The chase moved south toward Lafitte, a small, less populated community further out from New Orleans. With multiple units joining, the tension intensified. Deputies knew Darius was armed and dangerous. They knew he had already killed once that evening. The pursuit wasn't just about apprehending a suspect. It was about preventing another tragedy. The pursuit ended on the 100 block of Jean Lafitte Boulevard. Darius stopped his car, but the end of the chase wasn't the end of the threat. He jumped out, disappearing into the darkened streets, sprinting through yards and alleyways in a desperate bid for freedom. Deputies gave chase on foot. Heart rates spiked. Adrenaline surged. Each step was fraught with danger. They knew this man had taken a life and that he could be capable of more. Within moments, they tackled him, subduing the man who had turned a family holiday into a nightmare. Along the path of his escape, investigators recovered a firearm, likely the weapon used to kill Shaquille. It had been discarded, presumably in the hope that without it, evidence could be denied or diminished. But it didn't matter. Between the crime scene, eyewitness accounts, the vehicle, the pursuit, and the weapon, the case against Darius was already strong. Darius Guerin was booked into the Jefferson Parish Correctional Facility. He was charged with second-degree murder, the legal classification for an intentional killing without premeditation. Additionally, he faced charges of aggravated flight from an officer with a motor vehicle and obstruction of justice, reflecting the high-speed chase and the efforts to evade law enforcement. No information on bond has been publicly released, but cases involving the murder of a law enforcement officer, particularly at the hands of a family member, rarely allow for release. The charges alone ensure that Darius faces decades in custody, with the shadow of that Thanksgiving night following him for the rest of his life. The media coverage, understandably, focused less on the courtroom drama and more on the shock of the event. The deputy killed, the brother arrested, the community in disbelief. While some details of the trial and legal strategy remain unknown, the narrative is clear. Darius pulled the trigger, and the consequences were immediate and irreversible. When the immediate threat had passed and Darius was in custody, attention shifted to the aftermath. The St. John Parish Sheriff's Office organized a memorial for Shaquille Guerin, a tribute not just to a deputy, but to a man whose life was defined by service. Colleagues, friends, and family gathered to honor his dedication, to mourn his loss, and to grapple with the incomprehensible fact that his life had ended at the hands of his own brother. Shaquille's wife became a widow. His 3 children lost a father, not to a stranger's violence, not to the dangers of the job they understood he faced every day, but to someone who shared their DNA, someone who should have been family. The Waggaman community was left to reconcile the familiar with the horrific. Crime scene tape replaced front yard decorations. Homes that had been filled with warmth now echoed with silence. And the lesson, stark and painful, was unavoidable. Violence can erupt even in households that seem safe from the outside. In the weeks following that November evening, Marigold Lane remained quiet in a way that felt unnatural. The laughter of children was subdued. Neighbors who had once casually waved from their driveways now avoided eye contact, unsure how to reconcile the street they had always known with the tragedy that had unfolded. Shaquille Guerin's name was on everyone's lips, repeated in disbelief, sorrow, and anger. He had been more than a neighbor. He had been a protector, a fixture in their community, and now he was gone. There were tears, but also stories, vivid, heartfelt recollections of a man who had given everything to his community. One colleague recalled how Shaquille would stand in the rain, directing traffic for school children, refusing to take shelter until every child was safely across the street. Another remembered his optimism, the way he could lift a room simply by cracking a joke or giving a reassuring nod to someone in distress. Yet beneath the memories was a question no one could answer. How could someone so dedicated to protecting others be vulnerable in his own home? How could a brother, a family member, turn a celebration into a nightmare? These questions echoed through the community and haunted those who knew the Guerins. The children, still young, faced a grief unlike any other. Their father had been taken not by a stranger, but by someone who shared his blood. The lessons they would carry into adulthood were heavy. Trust and safety can be fragile, even within the most familiar of relationships. They would grow up hearing stories of a father who had dedicated his life to serving and protecting others, a man who had faced danger daily, and yet had not been able to protect himself from the danger closest to him. For Darius Guerin, the consequences were immediate and enduring. Arrested and charged with second-degree murder, he would face the legal system and the weight of a decision that could never be undone. No court proceeding could restore the life he took. No sentence could erase the trauma inflicted on his family, his community, or himself. Even if he were released decades later, the label of the brother who killed his sibling would follow him forever, a permanent stain on his life and legacy. Waggaman is a community built on long-standing relationships, trust, and familiarity. The Guerins were a cornerstone of that neighborhood, known and respected for decades. To see one brother dead in the street and another in custody, in handcuffs, was more than shocking. It was a rupture in the very fabric of communal trust. Neighbors described the sense of disbelief, the impossibility of the event. One longtime resident said, "You know people your whole life, and you think you understand them. And then something like this happens. You can't wrap your head around it." This sentiment was echoed repeatedly. 20-plus years of familiarity, of watching children grow and families thrive, could not prepare them for violence erupting in the heart of a home they had always considered safe. The tragedy also prompted reflection on domestic and sibling violence. Many people assume that family conflict is harmless or that it remains private. But cases like this reveal a harsher truth. Family violence can be sudden, devastating, and invisible to outsiders. It can lurk beneath the surface, unnoticed until a single moment triggers irreversible consequences. This story is about more than a crime. It is about the fragility of trust, the unpredictability of human behavior, and the devastating consequences when that trust is broken. Shaquille Guerin's legacy is a life of service, a life dedicated to protecting others, and a life that, tragically, could not protect itself. Thank you for joining us tonight on 12 a.m. Crimes, where we uncover the stories behind the headlines and dive into the darkest corners of real-life crime. If this story left you thinking, shocked, or questioning, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell. You never know what true crime case we'll explore next. Drop your thoughts in the comments and let us know which case you want us to cover next. Remember, the night holds many secrets, and we'll be here to tell them. Until next time, stay curious, stay vigilant, and keep it locked on 12 a.m. Crimes.